Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I'm proud to be joined by Senators Menendez, Hirono, and Kaine. Now, on Sunday, our country and many others welcomed the news that Al-Baghdadi was no longer a threat, and our brave Special Operation Forces were safe following the end of a bold and successful mission. And this is a great victory for the safety of our country and the safety of our allies and our partners. But we must not forget the fight against ISIS is certainly not over. We must not confuse the death of this evil man with the total defeat of ISIS. Because of the President's abrupt, reckless decision to withdraw U.S. troops from northern Syria, the threat of potentially hundreds of ISIS prisoners and sympathizers, many of them dangerous, who have escaped in recent weeks, is growing every day. We've not heard a single word from the Trump administration on the plan to deal with the escaped prisoners and to ensure the enduring defeat of ISIS, which is exactly why the Trump administration should brief the Congress on what the plan is. Now, finally, after we pushed for 2 weeks, we are getting a briefing tomorrow. Secretary Esper, General Milley, and others will be there. Not Secretary Pompeo. He seems to be running away from talking to us. But they will be there, and we want to know a plan. ISIS is a danger to our homeland. As a New Yorker, I realize maybe better than anybody how small groups of evil people thousands of miles away can cause huge damage here in our homeland. We don't know how many of the 10,000 ISIS detainees, many of whom were hardened fighters, have escaped. We don't know where they've gone or if there's any plan to get them back into detention facilities. We don't even know what the plan is to keep those who are still there from escaping. And these are dangerous people. Dangerous to our homeland and our allies, dangerous to our troops and our interests, and President Trump's policy failure just gave them a get-out-of-jail-free card. For the sake of our national security, for the sake of the safety of our dear homeland, President Trump and his administration need to answer the questions. What's the plan? What's the strategy? We need to know what the plan is to keep America safe. We need real answers. And one other point, I read in the paper today how much the Kurds did in terms of getting al-Baghdadi, how they scouted out where he was, how they plotted where he comes and goes, how they even were able to get his clothing and blood samples so we would know the DNA and know it was him. And then for the President to pull the rug out from under the Kurds the way he did is going to go down in history as one of the bad marks, very bad marks, of American leadership. Senator Menendez.
Thank you, Mr. Leader. We all owe an enormous debt of gratitude to the incredible work and accomplished mission of our special forces in eliminating al-Baghdadi from the face of the earth. He has met his maker, and the world is better off for it. His reign of terror, those who he led in ISIS, beheadings, rapes of women, terrorizing the region, is well documented, and the world is better off because he is no longer with us. By the same token, I hope the President can understand that it's not time to put a mission accomplished banner over the White House. The end of bin Laden was not the end of al-Qaeda, and the end of al-Baghdadi is not the end of ISIS. ISIS is still a challenge to the national interest and security of the United States. As the Department of Defense Inspector General has testified before Congress, there are at least 14,000 to 18,000 fighters in the Syria region alone, not to mention other nearby countries which have ISIS fighters. If you consider the 10,000 that have been detained by the Kurds, if the Kurds have to defend themselves at the end of the day versus worry about detaining ISIS prisoners, you have a reconstituted force of nearly 30,000 ISIS fighters. That is a clear and present danger to the national interests of the United States. We have been asking for and cannot get what is the definitive strategy to defeat ISIS by this administration. We cannot get a Secretary of State to come before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee or even to come into classified opportunities to understand what is the coalition that is being put together to continue to defeat ISIS. And it is incredible for me to hear the President's first words is that of recognizing Vladimir Putin and Russia. Outsourcing the national security of the United States to Vladimir Putin is not an option, is not an option. And failing to tell the leaders on both sides of the aisle about such an operation is, while you're complimenting Russia, speaks volumes about what the administration's thinking is. And lastly, in a related note, I think it's despicable to question the loyalty and the patriotism of Lieutenant Colonel Vindman, an Iraq War veteran, a Purple Heart recipient, simply because of his heritage. Simply because of his heritage. When I think of the national security of the United States, I think of people like Lieutenant Colonel Vindman. And we should be praising him, not defiling him as the President and his supporters are doing.
Senator Hirono.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here with my colleagues. The death of al-Baghdadi is indeed good news, and it causes a disruption for ISIS, but this is not a mission accomplished moment with regard to ISIS, because we all know that they have not been eliminated, and there's a great concern that there will be a resurgence of ISIS, including, of course, what's happening to the 10,000 or 11,000 ISIS fighters who are detained by the Kurds, of which maybe some 100 have already escaped to we don't know where. And in watching the President make his announcement about the success of this operation, my heart sank when one of the first things he said, aside from always talking about it in terms of his victory and himself, was to acknowledge Russia and Turkey. My heart sank, and he gave short shrift to the important intelligence that was provided to us by the Kurds. To listen to the President, now it was bad enough that he turned his back on our allies, the Kurds, but then he adds an injury to insult by really giving them short shrift and how much they were a part of the success of this operation. But that's nothing new coming from this President. I want to emphasize, again, we need to thank the Special Operations Forces and the Kurds, our allies, that we turned our backs on, and the importance of our allies. As a member of the Armed Services Committee, every military person who comes before the committee talks about how important our allies are. You think that they're not totally concerned that we have turned our backs on the Kurds? This is creating ramifications that I know that the President never considered. And this is what happens. The President makes these kinds of precipitous decisions without thinking about the consequences or the ramifications, not just to our country, but to other allies, definitely to the Kurds, and the concern about resurgence of ISIS. So we would like to hear from the administration. What do you have in mind? How are you going to mop up the mess that you, Mr. President, has created? What's going to happen with ISIS? What are your plans? And by the way, when you say that our forces are leaving Syria and yet you're sending hundreds of them to guard the oil fields, it's inexplicable. And I would like to add to my colleague, Senator Menendez, in giving our support to Lieutenant Colonel, who is a patriot. He is a decorated hero, still working for our country, to be insulted and to be questioned because of his background and the fact that he, well, it's just, those people who are questioning his patriotism are the ones whose patriotism truly should be questioned. Senator King.
Baghdadi, ISIS, and the Kurds. So the world is a better place with Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi gone, a terrorist of the highest order, and praise to all who participated in getting rid of him. But we know from experience, Mullah Omar, the founder of the Taliban, died in 2013, and we're still fighting the Taliban together with our Afghan partners. Bin Laden in 2011, we're still fighting al-Qaeda in multiple countries. And so if recent history demonstrates anything, it's that the death of one leader just allows others who share the ideology to move forward. And so the battle is not over. With respect to ISIS, Senator Menendez asked a very pointed question at the hearing that we held last week, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee hearing, where we had Ambassador Jeffrey. Remember, Ambassador Jeffrey was pulled out of retirement by President Trump because of his life experience in the region and asked to lead the Trump administration's work to support the anti-ISIS effort and to support what we were doing in Syria. And when Senator Menendez asked Ambassador Jeffrey, was he consulted with at all with respect to the precipitous retreat, the Trump retreat, he said no, he wasn't consulted with. And this is President Trump's own hand-picked envoy. It demonstrates the chaos of this decision. We need to hear the anti-ISIS plan. If the hand-picked envoy wasn't consulted and doesn't know what the plan is, that should make America very worried. Finally, the Kurds. The Kurds have been our best partner by far. There's not a close second in the battle against ISIS. Nearly 20 American lives were lost in the battle against ISIS, including some Virginians, but more than 11,000 Kurds lost their life partnering with the United States in the battle against ISIS. They joined with us at our request. When we asked them to go outside of the Kurdish region of Syria to help us retake Raqqa, they said, well, that's not Kurdistan. Why would we go in and fight against Arabs and go outside of the the Kurdish area of northern Syria? But they decided to do it because they thought partnering with the United States would promote a better future for the Kurds. When we asked them to destroy the defenses that they had along the Kurdish border with Turkey, making them more vulnerable to Turkish attack, they said, wait a minute, this will leave us defenseless, but with the United States as a partner, we think we can do this and we will be safe. When they learned we were pulling out like that from northern Syria, the key Kurdish military leader didn't say you abandoned us, didn't say you betrayed us. He said, you've tricked us. You have tricked us by making us take our defenses down and then leaving us vulnerable to slaughter by the Turks. That is no way to treat an ally. And when we put our troops then, we're removing our troops, but then they find that we're actually protecting oil wells. Is it oil, not people now? Is it oil, not allies now? What kind of message does that send to anybody that the United States would ask to be allies in the future?
Thank you, Tim. Okay, yes.
Schumer, the House is voting on a couple of measures related to Syria, sanctions, and also an Armenian genocide resolution. Should there be a similar vote here in the House? And the Senate?
Well, those are two separate votes. Yeah. I think both should be voted on in the Senate. We certainly should deal with sanctions to just protect President Trump when it leaves our nation vulnerable. And I hope Leader McConnell isn't doing that, but so far that's what his actions indicate, because he's refused to bring up any of these resolutions. The only reason not to do them, I don't even think he's opposed to them ideologically, is to protect President Trump when we know President Trump has made so many mistakes. On Armenian genocide, I've been a believer of this for a long time. Turks don't like to hear it because the truth hurts. And if we don't stand up to one genocide, we won't stand up to any.
Will there be a push here by
Yes, Burgess, go ahead.
Will the defense appropriations bill pass this week? And also, what's your sort of take on the broader task of funding the government?
The defense bill won't pass this week. I mean, Leader McConnell stretches the truth so. He's saying Democrats are preventing it from happening and preventing our soldiers from getting paid. Well, first of all, the soldiers get paid no matter what. They get a 3.1% increase in January, whether we pass or not. But McConnell knows the truth, which is simply that unless you have a bipartisan negotiation on the appropriations bills, nothing will happen. And we've shown him that. He originally wanted to have 5 bills in the first minibus. We told him that Milcon, which took money away from our soldiers and their families and put them into the wall, we couldn't vote for that. Take it out and we'll pass these other bills, which are bipartisan. We did. He hasn't done that with defense yet, or HHS, so those will not pass. But hopefully our Republican friends, many of whom don't want to see our cause of defense and the cuts in defense, will realize now that it's time to negotiate. As for the government's funding the government, look, I believe left to our own devices, Congress could work out an agreement to quickly fund the government. But I'm increasingly worried that President Trump may want to shut down the government again because of impeachment, an impeachment inquiry. He always likes to create diversions. I hope and pray he won't want to cause another government shutdown because it might be a diversion away from impeachment. It's very worrisome to me. Yes.
Senator McConnell does not want to discuss at the microphones the impeachment case against the president, at least on the merits. He wants to discuss the process, but not the merits. I'm wondering if you and your sense of your Republican colleagues on the floor, in the gym, anywhere, do you think that there's a realistic chance that the Senate would actually, when it comes down to it, consider actually really removing the president?
Well, look, I think we ought to wait and see the case that the House presents. Today, Colonel Vindman made a very strong case that what the president did happened and was very, very wrong. And to defile him, sometimes you wonder how low this president can go, but he keeps getting lower and lower. And many of our Republican colleagues and some in certain news media just follow him. I saw last night they accused Vindman of espionage. That was despicable, despicable. A man who's gotten a Purple Heart and served us in Iraq. So the bottom line is that they realize that their defenses are declining. And so first it was procedural. And now Speaker Pelosi has met their major procedural objections. They're having a vote today. It's a vote to continue the investigation, the impeachment investigation. And they're also having public hearings. So this idea that we won't be able to hear from somebody, the whistleblower is now being corroborated by somebody who's on the phone and who was on that call and has impeccable credentials. So we got to wait till this case moves forward and forward and forward. When you're in the gym, you hear a lot of Republicans talk a lot differently about President Trump than they talk about him publicly.
Leader Schumer, have you had any effort to have a conversation with the leader about an impeachment trial and the structure? I know we've asked you about that in the past.
He has not had it.
But, and if you did, what would you ask for specifically?
Well, we want a fair proceeding. We want a balanced proceeding. We hope that Leader McConnell will come talk to we Democrats about how to do it. He hasn't done that yet. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
I got it, thank you.